was pretty good. Welcome, everybody, to the October meeting for the Fairfield Board of Finance. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? We have some, I hesitate to say old faces, we have some experienced faces tonight, and we have some new faces, Caitlin Bossy and Mrs. Kathy Albin, who joined our board. So I would ask the two ladies to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance tonight.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Just a couple of welcomes, seriously, before we start. I'd like to welcome, first of all, our interim clerk for the Board of Finance, Caitlin Bossy. Welcome. You serve as controller of the town, so we're very familiar with your the quality of your work and your work ethic, and we thank you for taking on the role in an interim capacity, and we look forward to working with you. We'd also like to recognize our newest member, Mrs. Kathy Albin, who we have a lot of experience working with, as Kathy served on the Board of Education and actually served as the chairwoman of that board for a term, at which point I got to work with her rather closely. And Kathy, we're glad to have you here and glad to have an experienced person join our board. And as we always say, there's no dumb questions unless Ken asks them. But
That's okay. I earned it my first year. I earned it. Now, there's no.
Right. There you go. So feel free, anything and everything, and I think you'll find that this board is very collegial, and we look forward to working with you even more closely now. So, with that, our agenda this evening, first of all, we have an approval of the minutes of the September 4th meeting. We have several items for the Director of Health. Mr. Sands Cleary is here. Thank you, sir. In the first selectman, those items are basically grant-related items, and there's 4 or 5 of those. The 6th item on the agenda is our follow-up discussion on the Chief Fiscal Officer position for the town, basically following up on the information requests. I'd like to thank the administration for putting together the documents that we had requested at the last meeting and sharing those. So we'll go through some of those documents, any follow-up questions, and we'll also update you on the status of our process for the Board of Finance clerk position as we move forward. The next item, item number 7, is to talk about transfer of funds related to the last fiscal year. Item number 8 is some encumbrance items related to the last fiscal year. Both of these items, you'll recall, we handle every September or October related to the prior fiscal year cleanup items. Most of these items should not be surprises to us, as we've discussed them during our quarterly reviews, but certainly to the extent that people have questions, feel free. And item number 9 is to discuss the details and next steps required for the capital planning workshop. You'll recall that the capital planning workshop was postponed from September to October 29th, and that's scheduled to be here that evening, correct, Caitlin? So we'll be here. We'll also be joined by members of the Board of Education and Dr. Title, and members of the RTM, as well as our colleagues from the Board of Selectmen will all be here. It is October 29th. It is a Monday evening. And that, unfortunately, was the most convenient date at a late date for rescheduling this. I've asked Mr. Tetro and Mr. Mayor to just tell us a little bit about what we're going to be hearing that night. Not so much the numbers, but what their process is, what their thoughts are for the workshop that night. So that's it for the agenda. Any questions, comments, concerns before we move forward? All right, so item number 1. To approve the minutes of the regular meeting on September 4th, 2012. These minutes were distributed to board members. Questions, comments, concerns from board members on this item? Seeing none, can I have a motion to approve them? Mr. DeWitt, can I have a second? Mrs. Leclerc, all in favor of approving the minutes from the September 4th meeting? Opposed? Abstentions. And Kathy Albin's going to abstain. She was not a member of the board for that meeting. Thank you. All right. Item number 2. Mr. Cleary, why don't you come on forward? Welcome. The Director of Health, to hear, consider, and act upon the following resolution. Resolve that an increase in the estimated revenues for federal grants in the amount of $5,000 be made to cover the cost of Fairfield's continued efforts to further develop the Fairfield Easton Medical Reserve Corps and to promote the integration of the MRC unit into the local public health and emergency response system. And further resolve that the first selectman is authorized to make, execute, and approve on behalf of the town of Fairfield and any and all contracts and amendments thereof with the National Association of County and City Health Officials to conduct activities described in the NACO, probably said that wrong, MRC Capacity Building Award, with an anticipated contract period of September 15, 2012 through September 15, 2013. These costs are 100% reimbursable. Good evening, sir.
Evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
This is our annual Medical Reserve Corps Capacity Building Award. We've used these funds to basically enhance the capacities of the Medical Reserve Corps by buying different equipments, training supplies, conducting trainings. We propose to continue that this year. The same type of approach. And, for example, some of the activities of this past year has been 35 of our Medical Reserve Corps members supported the shelter during Tropical Storm Irene, staffing it for 50 hours straight, providing medical screening, medical care, staffing an infirmary, as well as assisting with feeding and other activities of the shelter. We sent nurses and staff to 3 other shelters during the October winter storm, supporting a Danbury special needs shelter for people being discharged from the hospital but couldn't go home due to power reasons. We staffed a shelter in Bloomfield, providing some supplemental staff after several days when their volunteer resources were depleted. So we simply desire to, this is an award, a capacity building award. We're asking for permission to receive this funding again.
Thank you, Mr. Cleary. Questions from board members on this item? Seeing none, to the public very quickly? None, back to the board. Can I have a motion on this item? Mr. Brockfeld, do I have a second? Mrs. Leclerc. All in favor of this item? Those opposed? Abstentions? The item carries. All right. Item number 3, Director of Health, to hear and consider and act upon the following resolution. I probably take more time reading it than reading this morning. Resolve that funds be transferred from an increase in grant revenue in the amount of up to $10,000 to cover the cost of a capacity building project to improve and enhance medical and public health functions that support emergency shelter operations. And further resolve that the first selectman is authorized to make, execute, and approve on behalf of the town of Fairfield any and all contracts or amendments thereof with the Office of the Surgeon General, Division of the Civilian Volunteer Medical Reserve Corps, in collaboration with the National Association of County and City Health Officials, to conduct activities described in the 2012-2013 MRC Capacity Building Awards contract. These costs are 100% reimbursable. Mr. Clary, back to you.
Thank you. This is a new grant that the Office of the Surgeon General has announced through NACHO, and it's a competitive award. So we have submitted an application. Our Medical Reserve Corps coordinator has submitted this application for us. And essentially this project, if we were to be awarded, is to focus on things identified in the incident action plan and the after action report from our shelter experience. So one of the things was having clear protocols and standing orders and the right equipment forms necessary to conduct the delivery of medical care in a shelter. So what we're proposing for this project is a shelter medical toolkit. The project is designed to have all the protocols and standing orders ready to be signed by any town if they choose to adopt this toolkit. It includes a training program for the nurses and a train-the-trainer package as well, and that's what we're proposing to do. Our current coordinator and our public health preparedness staff member would be taking the lead on this.
Okay. Questions, comments from board members? Mrs. Leclerc?
Just one quick one. Since it's a new grant, we don't spend any money until we know we have the grant?
With this particular one, since it's competitive, yes. For example, with the previous one, it's a capacity building award. If you apply, you get it. So with that one, what typically happens is there's a transfer into our account once it passes the RTM, and the contracts are approved when they arrive. With this one, we would wait since it's a competitive award.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Questions, comments from other board members? Okay, for myself, so the funds flow on the last grant, there's no possibility that we won't get it, because
That's
it's
correct.
not a merit-based or a competitive grant, as you said.
Yeah.
So we start spending the funds, and then we get reimbursed after the fact, is that correct?
That's correct.
What's the time lag on that, just so that we know?
The awards notifications typically come out in December.
Okay.
And the funds follow, once we execute the contract, the funds follow within a month after that.
Got it. For this one, as you referred to it as competitive, have we already been granted it?
No.
Okay, so what we're approving here is the opportunity for you to go and apply for it.
The approval here is to grant the first selectman authority to sign the contract if it is approved. All of these are to grant the authority for the selectman to sign the contract.
Right.
Should the contract come forward.
Right. So what's the timing on this one?
On the competitive award, we've submitted it, and we're waiting to hear. They said sometime early December we should hear. We'll have a
Right.
contract. And again, it's the $10,000 is the budget we've submitted. They say up to $10,000. They may come back and say it's a little bit less based upon how many grant applications they've received. And basically, we will adjust our budget accordingly to what the contract is, and we would submit that to the selectmen to be signed.
Right, so we're not approving to spend funds that you won't get. This only goes to up to the amount that you get.
That's correct.
Okay, is there, and it's a minimal amount of money, so it's a procedural question. Is there any reason why we approve this before you actually win it?
Well, I believe the practice started with some of the grant applications require resolutions
Right.
authorizing the selectmen to sign these applications prior to us even applying. And
Right.
So that, in the sense, is why we started this cycle of coming before the boards every year to get the resolution approved, so when the contract is signed, the town clerk can issue a resolution that the first selectman is authorized to sign this with the final contract.
Right. Now, for this one, it doesn't require that, but we're following past practice.
Since, it's a time saver for me to come
One time.
one time and go through all the
Want to come
various
see us a
meetings.
bunch of times?
Well, I do, but, I will be back for several months, and I always enjoy my time here, but,
Thank you.
Sure.
No. Any other questions from board members on this? Seeing none, I'll go to the public. Any from the public on this item? All right, back to the board. Can I get a motion? Mr. Bolito, seconding Mr. DeWitt. All in favor of this item? All opposed? Abstentions? We're good on this item. Thank you, Mr. Cleary. All right. Notice I'm not rereading it once we go to vote on it. These are rather lengthy. All right, Director of Health, to hear, consider, and act upon the following resolution. Resolve that funds be transferred from an increase in grant revenue in the amount of up to $15,070, $7,535 per year of this two-year contract to cover the cost of a cardiovascular disease prevention program, focusing on policy, environmental change for citizens served by the Fairfield Health Department, and further resolve that the first selectman is authorized to make, execute, and approve on behalf of the town of Fairfield any and all contracts or amendments thereof with the State of Connecticut Department of Public Health. These costs are 100% reimbursable by 9/1/12 to 6/30/14 State of Connecticut Preventative Health and Health Services Block Grant. Back to you,
So
sir.
this is our annual preventative health block grant that we get. The change this year, in terms of the funding aspects, is it's a two-year contract. Similar to what we did last fall with our preparedness contract, they went to a three-year contract. This year, the state is trying to streamline contract approvals and extend the time period. So this will be a two-year contract. This funding has gone to support things in the past, like our Lean and Lively program and our pre-diabetes risk reduction program. This year, they've been working with, due to some changes in the grant proposal, they've adjusted the activities this year in working with the Bike Walk Coalition, and these funds will go to essentially providing the striping, signage, stenciling for each year of 1 mile of bike lanes in Fairfield. And currently, the first year will be Mill Plain, and then when the second year comes along, where they are in the process, they will apply this fund to an additional mile of that same product, the striping, the signage on the side, the lines.
Okay.
And we're working with Public Works, Bill Hurley, and the engineering program and the Bike Walk Coalition in this project.
Thank you, Mr. Cleary. Do we have questions from board members? Mr. DeWitt, did you have something? Anyone else on this item? Nothing. Seeing nothing from the board, we'll go back to the citizens. Nothing from the public. Okay, the item is back before us. Can I have a motion? Mr. Bolito? Sure. Can I have a second? Mr. Stone? Okay, the item is now before us. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? All right.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I'm on that bike coalition, and this is really just the start of things, so I'm glad to see we've got a grant for it, and I'm glad it's going to continue.
Great.
'Cause we
Thank
need
you,
bike
Mr. Stone.
lanes, so I can say stay safe.
All right.
What we're doing.
Mr. Clary, thank you. I think, is that it for you this evening?
Well, I was, at the Board of Selectmen meeting, I had presented on the RIASAP grant as
You
well.
did, okay. Sure. Let's, let me read it then, and we'll stay. It says First Selectman here, so I wasn't sure how you wanted to cover it. So, to hear, consider, and act upon the following resolution. Resolve that funds be transferred from an increase in grant revenue in the amount of $5,675 to cover the cost of programs sponsored by Adults and Children Together, Fairfield Substance Abuse Prevention Council, and further resolve that the First Selectman is authorized to make, execute, and approve on behalf of the town of Fairfield and any and all contracts or amendments thereof with the Regional Youth and Adult Substance Abuse Program, RISAP. These costs are 100% reimbursable by 7/1/12 through 6/30/13 State of Connecticut Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services grant to local prevention councils administered by RISAP.
And so this is, again, an annual grant that we receive from RIASAP for youth and adult substance abuse prevention. And so these funds in the past have gone to support things like mini grants to the high school programs and elementary school programs. The intent of this is to provide youth with other alternatives, healthy choices for activities after school and during when they have a choice opportunity to make those choices, to give them healthy alternatives, things like Flip to Be Fit at McKinley School and other programs. This has gone to support. This grant will also go to give $1,000 to reduce underage drinking at the high schools, an educational program at the high school, and some mobilizing against tobacco for children's health, a program that RIASAP is coordinating, so we'll fund some of that as well, contribute to that.
Thank you. Questions? Mr. DeWitt.
On this one. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening.
Good evening.
As most of you know, Mr. Brockfeld and I are on a not-for-profit committee, and RISAP is one of our recipients of funds. So I guess I'm a little confused. We give RISAP $15,000, and RISAP gives us $5,675 back. Is that what we're saying here?
Well, RIASAP receives funds from the State Connecticut Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services.
Right?
They divvy those funds up to localities that apply for those funds. And so this funding is coming from the state through RIASAP to the localities. And so a portion of that will be to fund a regional project. We'll go back to RIASAP, but most of it will stay right here in Fairfield. And historically, I believe the tobacco is new this year, and most of it has stayed in town every year with supporting, local education programs, mini grants.
So are we eligible or just lucky enough to receive this money because we give money to RISAP? If we didn't give any money to RISAP under a non-for-profit funding, would we still be eligible for these kind of grants?
I'm not aware of the answer to that question.
I'm curious as to that relationship, you know. RISAP has a very specific charter and goals and objectives, and they do great things. It's just, I'm surprised to see their name associated with, I'm glad to see, with a state fund that gets us money back, but again, still a little confused how or why we pay into an organization that helps us get money back. Or maybe we could just reduce that transfer of funds, right?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I can get that answer for you.
Would you please?
Yeah.
And the other question I have is, so when your office receives $5,675,
Well, it actually goes, the First Selectman's Office administers the actual grant of this. And our health educator, Sarah Levy, sits on the committees involved in this, and so she essentially helps coordinate that, and that's why I get to be here before you tonight, to sort of represent the grant.
okay, so your department doesn't automatically get all these funds?
It comes to the town. The First Selectman's Office administers this, and that's why this comes from the First Selectman's Office. I'm here just to present on it. But I can get the answer, you know,
But it is Department of Health kind of stuff, right?
Sure, and that's
So,
why
I
we're
mean,
involved.
Where else would it go other than your department?
Yeah. Well, our health educator is an integral part, and we used to coordinate this grant and handle all the fiscal administrative aspects of it.
Right.
Several years ago, it was transferred over to the Selectman's Office. They've been handling all that part, but our involvement is still, you know, our health educator is still one of the key players in this, along with Kathleen Griffin and Kristen McCarthy-Vahey.
Okay. I'd be interested to see how much of the funds actually get to your department. Because one of the things we're struggling with as a committee is we give money to entities and not-for-profit entities.
Yeah.
And now I'm hearing we're accepting a grant for funds, and we really don't know how that money's spent, or if I'm assuming it's spent correctly, but
Well,
which one wants to?
you know, none of these funds are spent
Come on up, Mike.
by the health department. You know, it's not spent on health department staff or hours. All this money, the health department helps administer it, but all this money goes back into the community in terms of these mini grants and educational programs.
And Mr. Mitchell.
Yeah, some of these funds are what I'm going to call project-specific, so they're to fund a specific project. If we didn't get the grant, that project wouldn't get funded. But I think more to your point,
Yeah.
Mr. DeWitt, it might be worthwhile for your committee to invite the folks from RISAP in to explain how the financing works, how this grant compares to what they do with the funds they get from the town.
So I guess I don't understand what's one of the mini projects?
The substance abuse project that's referenced here.
The substance abuse, I'm sorry, what?
Sign any and all contracts and amendments thereof with the Regional Youth Substance Abuse Project, RISAP, that costs 100% reimbursable.
And who administrates the monies? If it's not
In this case, the
Department
First Selectman's Office, as Mr. Cleary had said.
of
So
Health? Yeah, I'm not making myself clear.
if your question is about specific projects, you know, what has this funded in the past?
My question is broader than I'm probably making it, but it seems as if there's money appropriated for Department of Health kind of stuff, or health services stuff, that should, in my eyes anyway, be administered by a Department of Health kind of person with that subject matter expert kind of stuff, and it's not. It's being administered by someone who may not be as well-versed on this topic as you. And maybe that's okay, I'm just,
Well, I would state it in such a way that Sarah Levy, who coordinated this project
Yep.
for years, who was the one who did everything related to this and sat on a committee with people from the First Selectman's Office and with community members, was the lead on this. Due to the demands of work, she asked to be relieved of that. And in that, sort of a transition of just the, who would type this up every year, who would, balance the books and submit the contract deliverables to the state. that was transferred over. We're still involved in the project. You know, Sarah Levy still sits on the committee, still is active in every decision that the committee makes in terms of reviewing applications for mini grants, the projects that the grant will support. So the Health Department is still very involved in the process as to why I'm here tonight. The specifics of those questions in terms of, is it conditional upon our funding of RIASAP? I don't want to give you false information. I don't really know that. I doubt it, because we've received this for years before we ever gave back to a regional project, giving back to RIASAP. That's a new thing, so we've been receiving this funding for years, but I can get that answer.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
And I would encourage your committee to speak to the folks directly at RISAP to find out kind of how their funding works, what their specific projects are, so you've got a good handle on that.
I'm looking over Mr. Brockfield, if I'm making any sense here.
You got it.
You know what I'm saying.
I do.
All right.
Thanks.
Any other questions, comments, concerns from board members on this item? Seeing none, we'll go to the public. None from the public. Back to the board. Do I have a motion? Mr. Bolito, do I have a second? Mr. Brockfeld. All in favor of this item? Those opposed? Abstentions? All right. Before I take up the next item, I want to, if I can impose a moment of personal privilege. I was introducing our new members and interim town clerk, interim Board of Finance. Betsy's going to love that. Interim Board of Finance clerk. I did want to recognize something that happened in the past month since our last meeting, and that is one of the most unsung jobs that the boards and commissions have is the secretary of the board or commission. And for about 6 years, we had a great secretary of our board, Deb Garavel, who stepped down from that position last year. And sadly, just after our last meeting, her husband passed away. And I meant to, at the beginning of this meeting, recognize that with a moment of silence. And with everything else going on, I did not do that. So I would ask that we just take a moment now for Deb and her family. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Cleary. All right, item number 6 on our agenda. To follow up on the discussion on the Town of Fairfield Chief Fiscal Officer, essentially the information requests that we had asked the administration to come back to us with, which they have, and an update on the status of the Board of Finance clerk position and that process. So, Mr. Tetreault, welcome. And did you want to say anything to start, or do we just want to kick it off with questions?
Just that I'd handed out earlier, pointed out to me this afternoon that the initial copies of the legal bills we had did not have the line item detail with dollar amount breakouts.
Okay.
We got those reprinted this afternoon, and I handed those out, so you have those on your desk. I missed that on Friday when we were distributing those, so I apologize for that.
Thank you, Mr. Tetreault. With that, we'll open the floor up for questions from board members on this item. Again, this is a non-voting item. This is a discussion. So feel free. Does anybody have anything out of the box? Mr. Bolito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Mr. Tetreault. Thank you for getting the opinion letter to us. I was able to review it and to also review the cases that were cited in it and the statutes and charter provisions that were cited in it. I have to say that having read it, I'm still not convinced. And the reason being is that the cases that were cited, there were 2 of them, are not directly on point. They're not exactly relevant to the factual circumstances we're talking about here. There's a couple of statements made, legal conclusions, if you will, that are based upon those cases in the statute, and they just don't seem to jive with me. Let me tell you what I'm talking about. On page 2 of the opinion letter, Attorney Dugas references Connecticut General Statute, Section 7-12A, which specifies, in accordance with the Charter, that the first selectman shall be the chief executive officer of the town. It is axiomatic that the first selectman is therefore empowered to set standards in the workplace, including the responsibilities of municipal employees. And the case cited here is Morris versus Congdon. Now, axiomatic means self-evident, and that's not exactly a good basis for a legal conclusion. I looked up the case of Morris versus Congdon, and give me a moment here. In that case, the Connecticut Supreme Court granted cert limited to the following issue. Did the appellate court properly conclude that the defendants, meaning the town, were not required to warn a special town meeting in accordance with the plaintiff's petition for a writ of mandamus? Not exactly on point. Also, earlier in that paragraph, again, page 2, it says, where the charter specifies that appointment and removal of the CFO within the discretion of the first selectman, quote, strict compliance with that procedure is required, and the case cited there is Bateson versus Weddle. That's the Metro Center case. I have to admit, when I first saw that, I thought it was put in there in jest for some reason, but the case of Bateson versus Weddle was a quo warranto action. And again, quoting the court in that case, in this appeal, we review the procedural and substantive requirements for maintaining a quo warranto action pursuant to CGS 52-491, which challenges an alleged unlawful usurpation of the exercise of any office, franchise, or jurisdiction. Again, that's not at all what we're talking about here. Those are the only two cases cited in this opinion letter. And what concerns me is that this is what you relied upon in kind of how you did things with respect to Mr. Hiller's termination, or whatever you want to term it. Again, I'm not exactly convinced. What it seems to me is that this is an unsettled area of law with no clear precedent. And if this is going to be kind of a bellwether of how we're going to proceed going forward with other town employees, I don't exactly think it's solid ground to stand on. I would have hoped to have seen cases that were more directly on point or relevant to the factual circumstances we had here. So that's my little soliloquy about the legal opinion, for what it's worth. The other comment I wanted to make is this. There's a larger public policy issue here, and that is that citizens have a right to know what their town government is up to, all right? And people in private industry have an expectation of privacy when it comes to their employment. Union members have an expectation of privacy when it comes to their employment, because that's what's collectively bargained for. But when you're talking about managers in town government, I don't think there should be that same expectation of privacy related to employment, because I think the public policy trumps that. I think that when you make a major decision that impacts every taxpayer, right or wrong, I think that should be subject to public scrutiny, and I think that the public has a right to know why those decisions are being made. Now, to me, if the decision made is based upon the facts and it's sound judgment, it ought to stand up to public scrutiny. And frankly, at that point, it would be beyond reproach. Now, no one is challenging the first selectman's ability to terminate the fiscal officer. That is in the charter. That's clear. But by entering into this agreement, it's almost like Pandora's box was opened, and we have the situation now where something happened that at best is legally questionable. I certainly don't think it's a solid legal decision. So again, going forward, you mentioned that if you had it to do over again, you might have done it a little differently with respect to confidentiality, with respect to non-disparagement clauses, things of that nature. And I hope that that's true, and you take that to heart, because this is kind of our crack at it, because the fiscal officer is something that impacts our board directly, and the clerk of the Board of Finance obviously impacts our board directly. But for employees in the future, we don't get a crack at it. So that's why we kind of made it an agenda item tonight in the previous meeting, to kind of let our stance be known that, you know, going forward, this just can't happen. And I respect your ability and your authority to remove people within your administration, but I just hope that you understand there's a greater policy issue here, which is that, you know, people have a right to know what's going on. And the second guessing that's happened and the conspiracy theories that have come out, It's unnecessary. It was completely avoidable had the provisions that are prescribed by the town charter just been followed. If the termination truly was for cause, then you go through the process. And if the reasons are good enough, it should survive the procedure. It should survive a vote of the Board of Selectmen. So that's really all I have to say on it. I think that this is kind of the end of it for us, unless someone else has something to say. But I just wanted to make sure that I spoke of those things so you know where I'm coming from personally as a citizen and a taxpayer and also as a Board of Finance member. So that's all. Thanks.
All right, Mr. Bolito, thank you. Just to be clear, I sought out legal counsel to get their input. Based on what they said, I also asked the town attorney to review it to make sure, and their conclusion was we were following charter, we were following a process, and it is within the First Selectman's authority to proceed as we did. In terms of the public side, you're right that and I did comment earlier that the amount of innuendo and rumor that was caused by some of that I was certainly concerned by, and it's definitely unfortunate. On the other hand, I don't have a good example of any performance evaluation being debated in public that was healthy for an organization or the individual in question. So in listening to your comments, it's just difficult to see how we get there. But I think I understand your point, and I can understand why you're saying that.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Specific to that item. Mr. Walsh, do you have something?
Specific to the legal opinion?
Yeah, do you have anything on that? Mr. Bolito opened that, so I'll stay there for a moment so we can put that to bed.
I concur. I've read the legal opinion, too, and I concur with the cases that I did read as well, so I'm not going to get into that. But I concur with Mr. Bolito's opinion in that the cases on point were weak at best. There were someone trying to find a case, and they were weak. There was nothing directly on point. Further, after reading that legal opinion, the answer that I still don't get out of it is either the agreement, the settlement agreement, and the general release with Mr. Hiller is either one or two things. It's a settlement or it's a contract. It's one or the other. Mr. Dugas couldn't answer that question on why it shouldn't go to the Board of Selectmen when we were at our last meeting. He still cannot do it in his legal memorandum. It's one or the other. He admitted at the last meeting that it was a contract. He was told not to look into it about what past practices were at the Board of Selectmen. But he does not still answer the question. I don't question your authority to be able to hire the fiscal officer. And actually, I believe that you have the right to let him go under the charter. The question comes in regards to the agreement that you signed, which is a very rich agreement, and whether you have authority to sign that. And it's either a contract that has to go to the Board of Selectmen for their approval, which I have to say I'm extremely impressed by the Board of Selectmen that it's at least getting there tomorrow, or it's a settlement that has to be done in executive session at the Board of Selectmen, or it's both. But either way, it's got to get there. So I was not impressed by the legal opinion because it didn't answer those questions. And having served on the Board of Selectmen and see these issues continually come before them, and our past history of always following that, it never got there. I appreciate Mr. Kiley making a motion. I appreciate Ms. McCarthy-Vahey for seconding that to at least it gets there for legitimate conversation. That's all I have to say about the legal opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Again, Mr. Chair, just in
Please.
follow-up, the attorney clearly states that it's a First Selectman obligation, that the Board of Selectmen does not have authority in that area, and it doesn't need to go before there. In spite of that, we did bring it before the Board of Selectmen for discussion, and as you pointed out, it is on the agenda tomorrow afternoon.
Mr. Stone?
I appreciate what both of you said, I really do. But just keep in mind that people disagree, lawyers disagree. That's why Supreme Court decisions are 5-4 or whatever. So Mr. Tetreault got an attorney an unbiased attorney, and got a legal opinion from him. Maybe if he used a different attorney, he would have gotten a different opinion. I don't know. But that's the opinion that he got, and that's what he ran with.
Mr. Chairman?
And Mr. Stone, I agree with you. Different lawyers can come to different opinions. I mean, I think one of the main points that did come out of that was at least Mr. Dugas admitting that this was an extremely gray area. Extremely gray. There was nothing clear-cut about it. It was a judgment call on his point as an attorney. It was not cut and clear. He understood my position. He understood Attorney Bolito's position. But it wasn't clear-cut. It wasn't black and white. It was a gray area, and it was a judgment call that he made. And that's what sometimes you have to do as being an attorney, in giving a legal opinion. But it was not clear-cut. It wasn't black and white. And I don't want anybody to think that it was, because he admitted right when he was sitting in that chair about a month ago that he understood that there were issues, that there were judgment calls. He admitted that he hadn't reviewed everything. But I understand, you know, when you represent a client, you can give a client advice, but the client ends up making the decision on which way they want to go with something.
Yeah, actually, just to be clear on that, that was not the case in this, and I understand that sometimes the client can drive that. In this case, it wasn't. I went to the attorney to ask what the process was, what the authority was, to make sure that we didn't take any steps before we knew how we could proceed.
Mr. Chairman, may I answer Mr.
You can.
Walsh's question? The question was why this didn't come before the Board of Selectmen, or why the attorneys didn't feel that it should come before the Board of Selectmen. And I'll tell you what I told the Board of Selectmen. I don't believe that it even gets there, simply because the Board of Selectmen doesn't have jurisdiction over this issue, whatever you want to call this document. And I think, Mr. Walsh, as you yourself pointed out, it's the first selectman's duty to hire or to let go the chief fiscal officer. That's very clear in the charter. And so I believe, therefore, you don't even get to that. And I'll give you an example as to why that, even if it's a contract, it doesn't necessarily come before the Board of Selectmen. There are a few positions in this town where the employee actually has written contracts other than a labor contract. Those are the police chief and the fire chief. Those contracts don't come before the Board of Selectmen. They come before the respective commissions. So you have a conflict in the charter right there. And that's what I'm saying here. You don't even get to the issue of whether it's a contract or not a contract. It's simply that that board, and as a matter of fact, this board, doesn't have jurisdiction under the charter. You just don't reach the issue.
Well, the police and fire, they have contracts. Did Mr. Hiller have a contract with the town?
No, what I'm saying is it doesn't matter what you want to call these documents, it doesn't go before the Board of Selectmen. They don't have the right to either hire or to let go the chief fiscal officer. That's the first selectman's prerogative. So you don't even get that far.
I'm not saying you can't hire or fire him. Just hire or fire him, just don't give him a golden parachute. That's what I'm saying, is that you don't have the right, he does not have the right, under our charter, that settlement, if it's a settlement, or contract, if it's a contract, has to go before the Board of Selectmen. I understand that he has the right to hire him. I understand that he has the right to fire him. What I'm talking about is the settlement, the signature that's on the agreement, and whether he has the right to bind the town to that agreement and give him that set of benefits.
He has the right to set the terms of his employment. So yes, I would believe
It's not
he
the
does
sign,
have
no,
the right to do
not the
that.
signs of his employment. This is the signs of his basically termination. And there's nothing talking about that at all.
Whatever
And
you want to call it, it's still his prerogative to do that.
It's a broad point of view, I admit, Attorney Lesser, but I'm telling you that if it's going to be a contract or a settlement, you know that every settlement has to go to the Board of Selectmen. Every settlement
disagree,
has to go
Mr.
to the
Walsh,
Board.
but
Did you
that's fine.
disagree with me that every settlement has to go to the Board of Selectmen?
It depends what it is. If the Board of Selectmen has jurisdiction over it, it does. I don't think you get that far. I don't think the Board of Selectmen has jurisdiction over this issue. That's the first selectman's prerogative.
I see nothing in the charter or state statute that gives an exception saying that the Board of Selectmen doesn't have a right to have every settlement or contract pursuant to the charter. The contracts that must go there have to go to the Board of Selectmen. I respectfully disagree with you.
Fine.
Go ahead, Mr. Bolito, and let's wrap this up on the legal
Absolutely.
point.
Attorney Lesser, you mentioned as an example the police chief and the fire chief having contracts, correct? Is it accurate to say that the police and fire commissions have specific authority under the charter to approve those contracts?
Yes, this is the first selectman.
Those are typically written up by the first selectman, and signed by the first selectman with the chiefs. Doesn't go before the commissions to sign.
They approve it, though. They approve the
No,
term.
they don't see the contract. Yeah. The commissions in both cases include the terms of employment, or the term of employment, I should say. The contracts are signed by the first selectman.
Right.
First selectman signs all.
So would it not be accurate to say then that you have, in that case, a specific provision in the charter that gives the authority to the commission? Granted that the first selectman signs the actual contract, but in terms of setting the terms of employment, there is a specific provision in the charter that gives that authority to the Fire and Police Commission, correct?
The specific details of the contract are covered, A, under the department head's benefit program, which they qualify for, or in the specific terms of the contract, which are negotiated with the chief and with the first selectman.
Right. But Attorney Lester's point is that the reason it doesn't go to the Board of Selectmen is that there is specific authority in the charter that gives that authority to the Police and Fire Commission, correct?
Actually, the contract itself is negotiated and signed by the first selectman.
Good.
But even if what you're saying is true, I agree that the charter also gives specific authority to the first selectman to deal with the CFO.
In terms of hiring and firing them, yes, but when you're
Yes.
talking about a contract, the first thing you outline with the fire and police is, in essence, a specific carve-out in the charter where those positions are dealt with and employment terms are dealt with by the Fire and Police Commission. There's no such provision in terms of the terms of employment for the CFO.
Sure there
or
are.
Wait, let me finish. In terms of a contract, in terms of a settlement agreement contract, when you have a specific provision that says all contracts must go to the Board of Selectmen, there must be then another charter provision that supersedes that, which is the case with the fire chief and the police chief. You have a provision that essentially supersedes that general authority given to the Board of Selectmen to approve contracts. But there's no such thing that I can see in terms of other town employees that are not union members.
Well, it's my belief, my opinion, that the provision that gives the first selectman the authority to manage those departments and to hire and fire supersedes that provision of the contract. There is a conflict, no question about it, of those two provisions. But my opinion, and I believe Attorney Dugas's opinion also, is that that other provision supersedes that, and that's where you
right.
come to that issue.
Fair enough. We'll have to-
That's our
that's fair
opinion.
enough.
We've given the opinion, and
No, that's fine. We're just
where
going to
it
have to
is.
agree to disagree, but I respect that. Thank you.
that's fine.
Thank you. Mr. Brockfeld?
Yeah. I'm actually getting a little uncomfortable with one aspect of the conversation, which is that I think I think Mr. Bolito made an extremely good point earlier, which is that we're dealing with the CFO of the town, and that person or that position has a lot of impact and coordination with our board. So that's one of the reasons, obviously, we have so much interest in this. But what I'm a little concerned about just listening to the conversation is that we're the Board of Finance, not the Board of Legal Affairs. And I think it's perfectly reasonable to talk about the terms of the separation agreement. If we have some financial questions about it, I raised questions about whether I was comfortable with the pension adjustment and so forth. I think those are reasonable questions. But, you know, we're lucky we have different skills on the board. We have two esteemed attorneys on this seat here, these seats here. We have another one over here. We had an outside attorney, Mr. Dugas. But I think to be adjudicating different, like you said, getting different opinions from different attorneys and then trying to resolve that here, I'm just not sure it's our proper role. That's it. I'm not really, I can't judge on it because I have no legal background. But what I'm hearing is that a lot of smart lawyers have different opinions on whether or not this, I guess, should have gone to the Board of Selectmen, is what it basically comes down to. And I'm just not sure it's a Board of Finance issue. That's just.
Thank you, Mr. Brockfeld.
Yeah.
I'm just going to recognize Mr. Bolito briefly because I want to get off this issue.
Yeah.
Don't blame you. Fair point, Mr. Brockfield. Here's why I think it is relevant. In this particular case, you're talking about the removal of the chief fiscal officer and the clerk of our board, which directly impacts us. We want to make sure it's being done legally, and I think that's absolutely in our ballpark. If we were talking about, say, the director of human resources, I would agree with you that really it's not a discussion for this board to have. We're not substituting, and neither is Mr. Walsh, our legal opinions for that of the town attorney. We're trying to understand why they came to the conclusion that they did and offer an alternate theory and say, well, what do you think of that? So I think it absolutely is fair game, but I also agree that this is kind of the one crack at it, and we're done, so.
Fair enough. All right. I want to go to one other item before I do turn this into a financial discussion, if I might, because, and I don't want to speak for Mr. Tetro whatsoever, but Mike, you and I, Mr. Tetro, you and I had a brief discussion today regarding a question that I had asked. And that was a question on that sheet, which was related to the procedure for employee management for termination. And you correctly point out that's not the purview of our board, and you didn't do it it wasn't a bad conversation. I don't put that in a bad light. I think you're absolutely correct, it's not. But the reason I asked the question was I have a great deal of experience with employees in Connecticut and how they need to be communicated with and what the process needs to be as you go through evaluations and personnel and you know, eventually where we got to this step, okay? And forgetting the legal questions over the agreement, one of the reasons that the agreement, the requirement and the necessity for an agreement like that is the process that took place. And that does have financial implications, because if that process is not followed well, you end up having to sign agreements and/or you end up in lawsuit situations. And the reason for my question and what this doesn't answer is, what is necessarily that process? Now, it could vary by union, it could vary, it's a pretty broad question, but I think the town needs to look based on this at what the process is for the evaluation, for the communication, for the expectations, you know, getting all the way down the line, because the employee, particularly in the state of Connecticut, which is a very employee-friendly state, for lack of a better way to say it, there are certain expectations that need to be met before you can do something about an employee's performance. And quite frankly, I don't see the process here for the town to do that. And I think that's one of the problems that led us to this agreement that everyone questions from a legal basis. And that's why I asked, what is the process? Because that has and can have direct financial implications to the town, which is the reason I raised it.
And which is why I consulted legal counsel right from the start to make sure that if we're looking at any options along those lines, that we had legal advice and followed the correct steps.
Was that process open to the employee? And I'm not asking on this, but I'm saying that it's very rigorous in the state of Connecticut, and everything has to be done in writing, from my understanding.
And Mr. Flynn, we followed the process.
Okay, I'd like to know what the process is going forward, to make sure it's there. But that's fine. Anybody have any questions? Yeah.
It's a follow-up to your question, I
Yeah,
think, Tom.
please.
Mr. Tetro, you've been in office, I guess, about a year or so, a little more than a year appointed. Does the town of Fairfield have some sort of procedure of, for senior management type, I'm not sure how the definition is, in non-union employees, some sort of evaluation standards and files and, like, you know, keep records and an annual review, for example, of people's performance so that we know over time how they've been viewed in terms of their job, if they're improving, if they're following instructions and so forth,
Yeah.
so that,
Not that I'm aware of.
okay, is that, and I'll ask that's Mr. Lester as well, is that something that's normally done in town? I mean, is that something we should be doing? Is that something that is done?
We have instituted department goals, to my knowledge, for the first time. For the department heads this year, we're going to be tracking them against those department objectives, so we'll start to kind of build in on an ongoing basis those reviews to see that how that goes by department.
Okay, so it's sort of a yes, is that right?
Yeah, based on department goals and objectives, but yes.
Okay. And
But
can I follow up?
we're getting started with that.
It's a new yes.
Yeah, it's a new yes, and just so everybody's clear, we're doing that for the first time. There's a kind of a wide range in kind of what those goals are, so it will be refining that over the next.
And that just started right now, right? Within the last several months?
Correct.
Can I follow up?
You should.
Okay. No, I mean, I think that's excellent. I mean, that's why I raised the point of his being in office for about a year. So I was curious where we were and what we might be doing. And I guess I would direct this again to Mr. Lesser. Would the implementation of that policy, and I assume it will continue to evolve and be refined and improved, would that help us in the future with a situation like this, where we'd have a little more of a trail, so to speak?
It probably would, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I
There's
don't know what the procedures
There's no
are.
probably about it.
Yeah.
I mean, you're in a very dangerous position taking an action like this if you don't have a performance evaluation system set up, especially in the state of Connecticut. And I don't need to be an attorney to know that.
Yeah, I think that the first selectman and HR, head of HR, will probably put their heads together and do something with that.
I'd like to, and I know, again, quote-unquote, not within our purview, but this can have direct financial implications, as we see, so I'd love to see what that process is, if we have something written down. And I think it's important for the employees that they know, because I think that has to be communicated. So, any other questions, comments on this item?
Sure.
All right, thank you on that. You want to go to the...
specific item or other things?
Other things related to this. I was going to go to the financial, which is one of the schedules that we had. So the financial analysis of the agreement is now before us. Does anybody have any specific questions or comments on it? Anybody? Let's go see if there's somebody we haven't heard from yet. I don't want to. I knew you wouldn't. Please, anybody? Jim, Mary, Chris, Kathy, anything? Okay, guys. Let's go to Mr. Walsh, then we'll go to Mr. Belito. Mr. Walsh had his hand up first.
I have a couple questions regarding the economic analysis, because this does not seem to track what we had requested at the last meeting. At the last meeting, and just to give you some background, I kind of watched today the Fair TV presentation just so that I was accurate in what I was requesting. And about the 2-hour and 54-minute mark and 40 seconds, we got into that. And we had asked for a complete cost analysis of every line of this agreement, of what the cost is for every line. And some of the things you have provided, a couple of the costs, for example, the severance payout of $33,632, the vacation payout of $31,046, the deferred compensation amount of $1,000. We'd also asked for what the opportunity costs were, as I think Mr. Chairman Flynn was the one who coined the term, of what the costs are for only having Mr. Hiller for 2 days a week. Because truly now it is 2 days a week, since he's now the CFO of a different municipality in Shelton, versus him being 5 days a week. And those numbers have not been supplied at all. And I guess the question is there a reason for that? Or are we going to be getting another presentation on what that is? Because I think we've got to look for the taxpayers on what the total cost of this entire situation was.
Simply put, Mr. Walsh, you have the total cost right in front of you. We put together an agreement that stayed within the salary line budget. It delivered the benefits that the department head is entitled to, and things like vacation pay, things like deferred comp, are things that are written in his benefit program and would be gotten. We stayed within the salary line, and we're going, we've made a commitment to make sure that service levels don't drop and all the work gets done. And if we need more, the 2 days is a minimum, as we've stated before. And if we need more than that, we will sort that out. But at the moment, we are working towards making sure that the work assignments are accomplished to the appropriate quality and on a timely basis.
So despite the fact that this board asked you for those figures, you're not going to supply them?
You asked for an economic analysis, and you received it.
No, we asked for a specific economic analysis, and if you want to watch the Fair TV presentation, we can watch it together. And at the end of what we asked for, and we each have a chance to go around the room to ask for what we wanted to be included in that economic analysis, you said you'd supply it, and that was not supplied.
And this is that analysis.
But
We
you know
stayed within the budget on salary line, Mr. Walsh.
What the
That's what we
opportunity
were
cost-
asked.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mr. Tetro.
All right. We stayed within the budget on the salary line. That's the job of this budget. That's the job of this, the executive branch, is to manage the finance department appropriately and stay within the budget, which we are doing.
But if we're going to look at the total cost of this package, clearly we only have Mr. Hiller for 2 days a week, when we previously were paying him $134,000 and change for 5 days a week, and now we've lost that cost. And I think that's why this body asked to see that in their analysis. And you had a chance to talk about it at the last thing. You said you'd supply it, and now it's nowhere to be found.
Correct. We gave you the economic analysis. That's what's here. That we were paying, we have the approved budget to get the work done. We're getting the work done within the approved budget. That's the job of this department to manage that, and we are managing that.
But if we're paying the same price within the budget, but we're getting less services, how is that the same thing? I don't understand.
Which less services are you getting, Mr. Walsh? There are no less services. We're committed to provide the same level of service, and in some cases, improve upon that.
But we're paying Mr. Hiller $134,000 for 2 days' worth of work, which
For a minimum
if
2
you
days of
annualized,
work,
if
sir.
you annualized that and you took it, divided his hours between the number of pay he gets, it's like him getting over $300,000.
Yeah.
If you
And
looked
that's-
at it as a salary.
Yeah, and since he's never going to get $300,000, he's going to get the $134,000 and change that's defined in the budget. That's what we evaluated against. That's what the cost is.
Well, we'd asked you for something, you're obviously not going to supply it, so I'm going to move on from that point unless somebody else wants to speak to it.
I don't have to speak to that point, but I do want to, because I was looking at the agreement today, or the economic analysis today, and I did want to point something out that might be a problem. Huge problem, I don't know, but it goes to the point about staying within budget. Proper accounting, and I checked with the auditors today, is since the agreement was signed this August, right? July, August, this fiscal year.
Yes, this fiscal year.
Yeah. The actual, and I saw the memo, that's what spurred me. I saw the memo from Human Resources. I think you have a budget hole, because the 31,000 in vacation, the 33,000 in deferred comp, or rather severance, all has to be accrued for this year.
Correct.
And I don't see the analysis, and I'm asking, that shows that we stay in budget with that. Because you're paying him for his salary for the entire year, and then you have $60,000 worth of payments that have to be accrued right now on top of his annual salary. Now, some of that vacation accrual, there'll be some of that there, there'll just be a true-up of that. But certainly on the severance accrual, you're going to be over on that specific line item.
Yeah, quite possibly, and I think that's how that's past practice. That's how we do it with every separation or retirement that we have.
But I guess it goes to the point that it's not staying within that salary line. This line's not going to be within budget.
Yeah, the salary line will be within budget. The benefit sheet are staying within our past practice in terms of how we account
Well,
for the
the salary
benefits.
line won't be within budget. The compensation lines for this department won't be within budget because you have to accrue the expenses related to the severance and the vacation. That's all I want to point out.
Correct.
Because I read the document that was provided, and it said that, if we pay it, we can push it, to the next year, and you can't. You actually have to record it right now.
Yeah, as much as that was an option, that the objective all along was to record it within this fiscal year. It wasn't a question of
Well, it
trying
wasn't
to-
even an option.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not proper accounting to do it that way. It's a signed document now. The liability is known, it's estimable. You've got to record it.
No argument,
So we've
Mr.
got a
Flynn. It's
budget
just,
problem.
that's how we handle vacation days for every single retirement, every single employee that leaves.
This is severance, not the vacation. I think the severance should be okay. It's the severance. I'm sorry, I think the vacation you should be okay, because that should be trued up every year, okay? You'll have some play in that number. The biggest issue will be your severance number.
Correct.
And I'm not sure, and this doesn't impact the operating budget, but I'm not sure of the calculation of what happens on the pension fund of that $52,000, okay? So, again, separate issue, But, so what we have before us says, quick math, 31,000 vacation, 33,000 in severance, 52,000 in pension. That's the current cost
Present
of the
value,
pension, the
as you
present
referred
value.
to.
Thank you, because I couldn't remember the term. And $10,000 in legal, for a total of those items of $126,000 of those items. Now, those are the items, that's incremental to anything else, right? Then, to Mr. Walsh's point, there's some opportunity cost related to the lack of his services for a period of time for the next fiscal year, for right now through the end of June. I won't go into that, but that's there. So the incremental cost is $126,000.
Well, except certainly, both the vacation pay and the deferred comp are part of the benefits program.
The severance
regardless.
isn't.
Right. The severance
Severance
isn't, that's correct.
That's deferred comp, that's 34 grand. The pension's not, that's 52 grand.
Correct.
10 grand in legal bills. A few $1,000s in vacation, who knows? I don't know. 60 days vacation, that's a lot. Okay. Now, I wanted to make sure I read it right and I understood it, so thank you. I didn't mean, Mr. Brockfeld.
Yeah, can I just circle back to one thing that Mr. Walsh was talking about, because I don't understand it exactly, but as I read this, the agreement, I think it's the second page, Mr. Hiller gets paid I'm just rounding numbers there, $130,000 between now and the end of this calendar year. Is that correct? Correct me if I
Yes.
say anything wrong. And then for the January 1st through June 30th, which is the second, still part of this fiscal year, right? He gets paid,
110, 111?
well, I understand what he gets paid, but he has a job now in Shelton. I don't know what he's getting paid for that job, but if I read this correctly, he gets the difference from January 1 forward. He doesn't get this big number anymore, assuming he keeps that job, but in fact, he gets a much smaller number because it's the difference between 134 and whatever his pay is. Let's say his pay was 100, he'd get 34. Correct me if I'm saying anything wrong, because I'm a little confused. So, in fact, from a budget point of view, it sounds like this is a savings, actually, to me, because Mr.
We don't have the economic analysis?
Well, I understand. Okay, so I'm guessing. So, Mr. Mayor is taking on Mr. Hiller's responsibilities without any additional pay. Again, correct me if I say anything wrong. So he's going to be doing Chief of Staff and and CFO at his regular pay. And we would have been paying Mr. Hiller annualized 134 or something like that for those following 6 months, but in fact, we'll be paying a lot less. And in the budget, we were expecting to pay X, but instead we could be paying 30% of X or something.
Maybe.
Am I missing something here? It
We'll
sounds
pay him
to me like this
110
is-
for the we're going to pay him $110,000 annualized over the last 6 months.
No, not if he,
Oh, yeah, well, he's still working for the town of Fairfield. He plans on fully staying. Mr. Tetro, has he talked to you about that? He's still planning on staying 2 days a week from January to June, correct?
We haven't had the discussion for after January.
Yeah.
We will sit down. It's my understanding at the moment he's working on a per diem basis up in Shelton.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. And I also think that the lawyers said that your interpretation, which I get,
You understand what I'm trying to-
I thought they said that that was wrong last time they were here.
Well, can we actually talk about that just for a second? Because I think as
Yeah.
long as we're talking about the budget impact, again, I'm thinking that it could actually be again, the truth is, it's
Well,
not,
the reality is, since we don't know what he's making in Shelton. and-
no, but he's making something,
And-
so he's going to get paid,
Yeah, the difficulty with a lot of this cost analysis, easy to do in 2020 hindsight, it's hard to plot out all the options that are right now. We don't know how long the job in Shelton lasts, we don't know what he's going to do with that, we don't know what's going to take place there.
no, but I'm just positing that in fact, while I think you're raising a fair point, that there's a concern there could be a budgetary impact in one direction, it's just as fair to speculate that the actual budgetary impact could be positive.
I thought the.
Not that that was the intention.
Yeah, let's
but-
ask the attorneys, because I thought the attorneys actually, I thought Mr. Dugas, had indicated that we had read the agreement incorrectly.
That he would get
last time.
paid. that he-
Regardless.
That he would get paid
Do you recall
here.
that as well? That's what I remember him saying.
Only through 12/31.
Yeah. Okay, good.
That's my understanding, so.
Let's follow up on it. That's why we need the
That would be,
economic
that would be a
analysis.
good,
Yep.
Well, as part of
Any
that
other-
economic analysis, could we get Mr. Hiller's opinion about whether he's staying on for the 2 days?
I would imagine we'll have to, right?
So are we asking for that?
Yes, we
Okay.
will. Mr. Stone.
Just on the flip side, one of the reasons you reach some sort of a settlement is to avoid huge legal fees for the town.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Mr. Brown?
I have the agreement right in front of me, if you want me to just read it quick, maybe we can,
Please.
or do we know it and we just can't interpret it right? But it says from January 1, 2013 to June 30th, 2013, Hiller's salary shall be reduced to $110,000 on an annual basis, right? Then it says that the town will continue to pay him the difference between his salary for such position and $134,591 until June 30th, 2013. So otherwise, his annualized salary shall be $110,000 for the period June 1. So his salary is $110,000. And the town will continue to pay him the difference between his salary for such position and $134,000. That,
No, that, can I?
Yeah.
No, I think the way I read it, and again, this is all reading it, I'm pretty confident I'm reading this right, Jim. It's saying that if he were to
Gets
have-
another job.
If he were to have left here and gotten no job, between January and June, he'd get paid $110 a year annualized, right? Or if he got a job in Shelton or elsewhere and was making, say, $100,000 annualized, then we'd owe him $34,591 annualized. I believe that's reading it right. And so if that was the case, and again, we're belaboring something we don't know the answer to.
Well,
but
we
if
don't know
that
the
was-
answer, and we don't
right,
have the analysis on
right,
it.
but
We
if-
really don't know.
Right, but if that were to be the case, in other words, if.
Right.
it-
The one
yeah.
thing I do know,
Yeah.
by looking at the documents, is right now, we've signed ourselves up, for better or for worse, whether right, wrong, indifferent. We've signed ourselves up for $33,000 in severance cost, $31,000, that'll adjust, I'm sure, a little bit, right? And $52,000 in pension costs. That's what we know right now. The rest of it depends on who does what to whom and when.
I agree with everything you said with one
Yeah.
caveat, which is that the first two items, the severance and the,
Yep.
what was the other one? Was it vacation?
Vacation.
Vacation. Those are hard numbers, and they're all hard numbers, but they're also immediate budgetary numbers.
There absolutely
Right.
are.
The pension, which I don't,
Exactly.
which I actually don't love, but the pension is actually a present
not an
value.
operating-
Right,
it's
it's a
not an
present value
operating
of a
budget.
future stream of money, so
That's
it's not
correct.
actually going to impact the budget.
That's correct.
Right, okay.
That's correct, yeah. Mr. DeWitt?
So based on all the numbers, I won't read them off again. Can I make a request that we are told specifically where these funds come from? So if the 31,000 is vacation payout is within the budget, within the salary line, great. But the 33,632 is clearly not. So I'd like to make a request that we understand exactly where that money comes from. Because at the end of the year, transfers happen, $5,000 from here, it's confusing. So I'd like to make a request, I guess through the chairman, that we understand exactly where 33, any funds, let me put it this way, I make a request through the chairman that we understand the data of any money that is taken above and beyond the salary line of the CFO. Please.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Mr. Walsh?
Yes. Mr. Tetra, who prepared this economic analysis?
I did, with input from Human Resources. There are some attached memos that document where the numbers came from.
Which is where I
Yes.
found my data. Yeah.
On the last paragraph where you're talking about the pension, it says, Mr. Hiller's salary is to be adjusted on his last day of employment to get him to approximately the level that he would have stayed the 4 additional years planned. So you're saying that he would have been after 4 years at that 155 and change, $600, I think it is. I did a quick analysis on Excel, and in order for him to get there, for Mr. Hiller to get there in 4 years to the $155,600, he would have had annual increases of 3.7%. And I'll show you guys the
Yeah, Miss-
analysis that I did.
Do you have a comment, Mr. Tetra, as he passed out, please?
Yeah. Mr. Chair, I think that's the same question you asked last time, and the salary was adjusted to get him to the same pension level he would be at if he stayed, which is one part, Mr. Walsh, as you're pointing out, based on salary increases, and one part based on incremental years of service and a higher pension, I'm going to call it share. There's 2.27% per year that's earned for each additional year that he stays.
So what was just so that we can get to it, how was the 3.7 calculated then?
It's not 3.7, really.
It's not,
No,
wasn't-
well, I
it
mean,
wasn't
in
3.7.
whole
fairness, let me
dollars,
give you
it's
the full-
3.7, yeah.
Don't forget that the pension is comprised of your number of
Right.
years of service times 2.275% per year.
Absolutely.
So that's going up every year as well as the
So
salary.
you've got
All I'm
that.
asking is what's the calculation that says that the 155 is the right number? That's what I'm asking.
Okay.
That's it, very simply.
We'll provide that.
All right. Mr. Walsh, anything else on that?
So you'll supply a calculation on how you got to that number?
Correct.
Based on his salary? Because I thought the pension was based on, to get to that, you're based on your last year of your salary, correct? So somehow we got to get it to his salary, showing us how his salary is going to get to that number.
It's not just salary, though.
It's not,
It's
not
years of
just
service also. He gets about a 10% increase in his pension, his percentage of his salary because of those extra 4 years. So he's getting about 10% more.
Because of the way the calculation.
Even if his salary didn't go
All right, if
up,
we can
his
see that
pension would go up another
calculation.
10%. That's what you're
I'd like to see that
leaving out.
calculation, because we're asking the rest of our town employees to take a lot less than 3.7%. I mean, we're asking them to take some hard numbers in our current contracts that you're negotiating, and some of the ones that were recently signed. And I just want to see that, because this is how we get into trouble, and employees start getting, angry about things when they think that, department heads are getting a lot more than they are. So I'd like to see how that calculation was done.
Thanks. We did request it, so. Any other questions, comments, concerns on the economic analysis on this?
I do when you have a chance.
On the economic analysis?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, in regards to the economic analysis, I think one of the numbers that, and Mr. Stone kind of addressed it, was that, there are some savings in settling cases like this, but there's also a cost that comes with it. And, there are some bills here from Bircham Moses that take us through the end of August. I take it that they have not supplied their September bill?
correct.
Which includes the last Board of Selectmen meeting that they were there for, and the...
The last Board of Finance
The
meeting.
Board
that they were there.
of Finance meeting, and also the legal opinion that they did, I guess, on behalf of the town, that was supplied to the Board of Selectmen and to this body, correct? So none of those numbers are in. Mr. Lesser, did you bill on this matter as well?
I did.
Okay, do you have bills
I,
for this?
yes, I did submit some bills.
Okay. Could we get copies of those? Because it's not just the 126.
Right.
It's the legal bills, which Mr.
The 126 includes $10,000 of legal bills, which were the legal bills that
Okay.
were supplied here.
All right, I just want to make sure that when we get to the final analysis on what the costs are, that we take into account all the bills.
Okay.
All right, so if we can see those, that would be great. And when do we normally get the Bircham and Moses bill? Is it pretty contemporaneous to the end of the month?
It hasn't been up to this point, but I will make sure that it is at this point, yes.
Yeah, because I asked Mr. Mayor for it, and he was having a hard time finding their bills. Did these bills just come in?
Yes, I had actually asked them to hold on to those. I thought it might be a little bit awkward for Mr. Hiller to be signing off on the bills in this case.
Is he the only one who could sign off on the bills?
They run through finance, so he'd be seeing them, so I thought it was best to wait till after the 15th.
Okay. And pursuant to the billing is, on the May 31st, 2012 first billing, which is on the August 10th, 2012 bill, is that the first time you consulted with them in regards to Mr. Hiller's situation?
Correct.
Okay, and who is JPM? The
One of
initials?
the associates that works with Mr. Dugas.
Okay, so you approached them in on May 30th, 2012. That was the first time you had contact with them in regards to Mr. Hiller's situation? Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and Mr. Dugas?
And I'm going to say approximately, because obviously we had some conversations before that, before we started that. They started billing us with that.
You had conversations with the firm that they decided not to
We
charge
did-
us for?
No, we had to set up the appointment, that type of thing.
Oh,
So when
okay.
you say first contact, I don't want to get into a semantic game.
Okay, that's fine.
But that is the first bill we got, correct?
That's all I have on the numbers.
Great. Mr. Brockfeld?
Can I make a request through you, Mr. Chairman?
Please.
Maybe a slight amendment or addition to the request we're making for financial analysis. And what I'm interested in now, as I'm thinking about this, is that since it doesn't seem that the questions of this whole matter are really whether or not the first selectman should or shouldn't, or does or doesn't have the authority to replace the CFO, but really it comes down to some questions about how it was done and so forth, the legal issues and so forth. I think it'd be a little more interesting when you provide the further economic analysis that's asked for, if you separate it into two reports, actually. One report is the actual numbers that are going to come out of this as it stands, but also what it would have been if it had been done in a, lack of a better word, cleaner fashion, meaning if it had been a traditional retirement or termination. In other words, there are things that are going on here that are because of this agreement, such as the pension, but would have been costs no matter what if we had simply had a resignation or a termination that didn't involve this settlement, right? For example, you'd have a severance either way.
No, you wouldn't.
You wouldn't, I'm sorry, you'd have vacation time
You'd have
either.
30, you'd have
vacation-
$31,000 in vacation.
Right, you'd have vacation either way, but you wouldn't have necessarily severance or pension. So there are actually,
You'd have $31,000 worth of expense, essentially.
right.
I mean,
Right, I wouldn't mind seeing that, though, in a little more official format, because I think that's the more interesting question, is what's the incremental cost to the town because it was done in this fashion versus what it would have cost otherwise, right? Not the absolute number is interesting, but the real interesting question is the net number, because that's what we're complaining about in one way or another.
right now, we're sitting at 126 minus 31.
For example, but it might be different, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions, comments, concerns on the economic or on something else? Mr. Walsh?
In regards to the pension, and this is just a question to the first selectman, and I don't know if anybody else here knows, I know Mr. Brockfeld knows about pensions. In regards to the pension analysis that was done, does the present value matter whether Mr. Hiller either elects to take as an individual when he retires, or whether he has a survivorship benefit? Does the actuarial number change?
I
When
don't
an
know.
employee,
That's-
when an employee
that's-
retires, you know what I'm talking about?
I know, exactly.
Okay, sure.
There's several levels of the program that you take based on, and until that election is made, when the, at the end of term, it's hard to determine different elections, but I don't know how, if there's a difference, and I don't know how different, I can check and see what, I'll ask on that, I just don't know.
If you could just find out, maybe, I know the amount goes down if you take the survivorship benefit. I guess the question is actuarially, when they figure out what that amount is it a net number the same to the town?
You would
Coming out
think
of the
it-
pension
you'd think
fund?
it would be, kind of.
I mean,
whatever.
I would hope that it would be, but I'm not
Yeah.
sure. If you could just find out that
We
answer.
went through that.
Yeah,
in
given
my
that's not one of the, well, let's just check, let's just confirm.
Yeah, thank you. Any others?
The last question I have is that there was two legal opinions that were requested at our table the last time. One was, and Mr. Dugas said he'd get back to us, whether this board has the ability to hire Mr. Hiller back immediately. And he said he'd get us an opinion on that.
Question. Yeah.
Not at the end of June, whether at any point in time, because it's our sole right on this board to control, hire, let go our clerk, whether we have the ability to hire Mr. Hiller back, because at least I believe that there was a breach in the charter in negotiating our rights away. So if you can find, has there been an analysis done on our legal opinion that you've seen, or have you asked for one?
I haven't asked one, it wasn't on the list that I received, so that wasn't part of what
It
we
was discussed that night directly with
did.
him.
I remember
Yeah.
it being discussed, I'm
Yeah.
not
But it's a fair
suggesting it
point.
wasn't.
I didn't
But
put
it
it on
wasn't
my
on the list, so I
Okay.
did not follow up directly on that.
And the other was, there was a request for a legal opinion, and this was a request by Mr. Bolito for legal opinion regarding how the reorganization provisions of the charter apply in this situation, and whether they would cause there to be some type of problem with us entering into this agreement or not. And Mr. Dugas said that he would get back to us on that.
Well, he said he'd get back with a written opinion, I believe. I think he said that under his initial opinion, what he talked about that night is there are no issues with that.
And Mr. Bolito followed that up and said, can you get me a legal opinion on that, quoting statute, case law, everything, and he said he would. So, and that was, I picked that up during the day when I was going through the Fair TV rebroadcast of our meeting.
We follow up on just those items, make sure we button it down.
That's all I
Go
have.
from there. Thank you. Anybody else? All right, on this matter, the other item, and thank you, and Mr. Lester, thank you.
Quite welcome.
One of the next item on this matter was actually just us to update you on the Board of Finance clerk position, and where do we stand. So at the last meeting, we formed a subcommittee, which was Mrs. Leclerc, Mr. Stone, and myself, to move forward the process on the replacement of the Board of Finance clerk. This was after we appointed Ms. Bassi on an interim basis. We had a meeting, and we put together documents which have been distributed to this board on the qualifications that we would like in a town clerk, I said it again, Board of Finance clerk candidate, as well as what we thought the job responsibilities are. At our request, Mr. Hiller attended that meeting and was intimately involved in the discussion to make sure that we didn't leave something out. And he was there for thoroughness and completeness, and we thank him for his time. The results of that meeting for both the qualifications as well as the responsibilities of that clerk position are now presented to you for your questions or comments. Once we get those, we will move on to the next phase, which will actually be working with Human Resources to make sure the position is posted, and then setting up a process whereby the subcommittee will review candidates and make a recommendation to this board as to what we should do with the position. So with that as kind of the preamble here, is there any questions, comments, concerns on the items? I'll go to Mr. Brockfeld, who raised his hand first.
I thought you said other than.
Go ahead.
No, it all looks good to me, and I thank you guys for doing the work. I just don't see anything on here about compensation.
Yeah, thank you for that. We actually wanted to get a bit more information about that.
Okay.
So we have not, we do not have a recommendation on that for you right now. We wanted to focus on, here's the qualifications that we think need, here's the responsibilities that we would like. If everybody's okay with those two items, that goes towards what should the compensation for the committee be.
So would that be something that you
We'll come back to
you
it.
and Mr. Stone would?
And Ms. Leclerc,
I'm sorry, Ms. Leclerc.
we
would
will
you
make a recommendation
do
to
that
this
as well?
body on.
Okay.
Correct,
Very good.
correct. Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you. Since prior to this time, at least all my time on the board, the clerk and the CFO have been synonymous, right? What I didn't see in here is what, I don't know how to phrase this, what the CFO should be providing, or what requirements there are on the CFO to provide the clerk with data.
That's beyond the scope of this. I mean, the CFO will work with the clerk as our representative, just like the clerk would work with other department heads.
So is it fair to say that any request that the clerk makes of the CFO or that office is to be complied with? I'm just saying before, it was the same person, so it was,
You know, as much as we get the request from the department, as much as the department heads comply with the request,
fair enough.
you know?
Okay. No,
Yeah.
it seemed very one way, but I understand what you're saying, right? Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? Mrs. Albin?
Is it intended that this individual will be in town hall on a regular basis? How will they do their duties?
Yeah, thank you for the question. One of the, you'll look, I think, under the qualifications side, if I can grab it. We listed it as a preference and not a requirement, because we didn't want to put limitations of this sort right now. But the preference would be that it's an current employee of the town of Fairfield with knowledge and experience communicating and interacting with various town bodies. Now, it's not a requirement, but it is a strong preference. Given, to Mr. DeWitt's point, there's got to be some familiarity and knowledge, not just with the chief financial officer, but also with the other town department heads in order for this position to be very efficient. Otherwise, it probably ends up costing us more money and perhaps less effective. That was at least the discussion. Mary and Bob, did I sum that up accurately? Please.
Ms. Albin brought up a good point that I didn't think of, but we've asked this question before with Public Works when they started doing projects.
Yep.
We always said, what didn't get done?
Yep.
So I don't know how we...
The thought is that this is incremental to the job.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, we don't have anything to vote on this item, but we wanted to share it. Please, you've had the document now for a number of days. If anything comes to your mind, please forward it to the committee. Our hope is that the committee will meet again next week and further the discussion on process to come forward and make a recommendation at some point in the future. Okay? So that's it for this item. I'm going to ask for a brief break here. Let's take a 5-minute break, and we'll come back to the table and address the other items. Thank you, everybody.
Taking over from this point forward. We have a couple more items to clean up. I want to zip through them pretty quickly. They shouldn't take too long. Item number 7, to hear, consider, and act upon a series of transfers of funds to correct overdrafts in department budgets as follows. There is a $9,446.93 transfer from contingency to the First Selectman's office regular payroll, a transfer of $288,898.40 from contingency to legal services, fees and professional, a $206.35 transfer from contingency to retiree benefits life insurance, a transfer of $284,764.81 from contingency to human resources heart and hypertension. Going to the next page, $135,853.61 transfer from contingency to unemployment compensation. Transfer of $1,603.68 from contingency to hydrant and water services utilities. A transfer of $695.20 from contingency to emergency management, regular payroll, and Social Security. $9819.69 from contingency to Public Works Administration, regular payroll. A $5569.55 from contingency to building regular payroll, and a transfer from contingency to solid waste in the amount of $2389.91. Those are all of them. So who's going to be presenting?
Obviously the CFO.
That would be you. Mr. Mayor, you have the floor.
How you doing? This is the annual cleanup where you transfer department overruns to the contingency account. It's a requirement that that the books be balanced at the end of the year. This is, you've seen this every year. Are there any questions about any of the specific items?
Okay, and I would ask that if you have questions, just direct the question to the specific one of these transfers that we're talking about. We can kind of do them out of order, whatever your pleasure. So, Mrs. Albin?
My question concerns the $288.98.40 for legal services. Is it possible to detail that overrun?
My understanding of that number is 3 major items. There was the union contract negotiations, Attorney McHale, the tax appeal activity, which has been significant with the revaluation, and legal bills related to the Metro Center.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Albin. Mr. Walsh.
Do we have a breakdown of where we went over budget in those areas? I mean, $280,000 is, or it's actually almost 281, is more than half the budget. More than half the budget. It's a over 50% overrun. It seems like a completely out of whack number. And I presume you have schedules or can tell us what the amounts are and where we went over and what areas and how much those dollars are in those areas?
Mr. Tetreault?
Yeah, simply, Mr. Walsh, we've covered it every quarterly review all the way through. This has been building throughout the year. It started with the Metro Center invoices and the legal negotiations that started early in the year, so it's been coming throughout the year. This is consistent what's been reported at each step. So it's not like there are individual budget breakdowns, but we can certainly do an actual versus budget cost, so you can see what where the 280 comes from.
Okay,
Mr.
I'm
Tetreault,
new to
since
this
we-
body, so I've not
Absolutely,
been to
that's fine.
those quarterly reviews. So, yeah, that'd be great.
And conveniently enough, we have the quarterly review meeting coming up the end of this month, so if that information is provided as a matter of course, obviously, we'll be looking out for it. Thank you. Anything else, Mr. Walsh?
No, that was the one I was most concerned about. The others I understand.
Okay. Any other questions on any of these items? All right, seeing none, do we have a motion to approve? Rather than reading them all one by one again, we're just going to do it to consider act upon a series of transfer of funds to correct overdrafts into department budgets, as was previously stated. Do I have a motion? Mr. Stone, seconded by Mrs. Albin. All in favor? Opposed? Abstention. All right, so that carries 7 in favor, 0 against, and 1 abstention. If I got my math right, all right. Bingo. Okay, let's carry it on to item number 8. To hear, consider, and act upon a request from the fiscal officer to approve Schedules A, B, Supplemental C, D, E, and F, feel like I'm on Sesame Street here, included with agenda, carrying over funds for encumbrances and reappropriations, as of June 30th, 2012, as supported by purchase orders or letters of request by department heads or the fiscal officer. Now, those schedules were provided with the package. Does everyone have them handy? Mm-hmm. Okay. Please, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Schedule A is basically, in the normal course of business, the town has a budget. Before expenditures are paid or before services are requested, a PO is issued. Not all the POs get paid before the end of the year. Mm-hmm. So these are all budgeted items for which a PO has been issued, which hadn't been paid as of June 30. That's Schedule A.
Okay.
Any questions on Schedule A?
Is there backup for all of these items? This is my first one of these I've been to as a Board of Finance member. So
Right.
do you have backup for them, what invoices they are, what it's for?
This can be pulled off the munis. You can get a detail of each of these numbers,
Can you supply that to us?
if you would like.
Yeah.
I think that's a formal request, so if you could please provide that for our quarterly meeting, that would be appreciated, Mr. Mayor.
You got it.
All right, any other questions on Schedule A? No? Okay, let's hit Schedule B, Mr. Mayor, please.
Okay, Schedule B is, back to Schedule A. Do you want it for the Water Pollution Control Authority as well, or just the town?
Sure, yeah.
Yes, okay, thank you. Schedule B is any POs that for some reason encumbrances that hadn't been paid that are over a year old. As you can see, Schedule B, there are none.
No questions, I'm assuming. All right.
Schedules,
We're really angry about that.
Yeah. Mr. Mayor, please continue.
thank you, sir. Schedule C is a little bit different. Schedule C is budgeted items for which a PO has not been issued, but which the departments have requested they be carried over. The 4 items, the Conservation, Human Services, Fire, and ECC. The Conservation item relates to the 2120 Cross Highway property. It was gifted to the town by the state, and they're basically, that's for cleanup, signage, gates, et cetera. They haven't issued the POs for that yet, so that's being carried over. Human Services, that has to do with the senior center, There was $30,000 in the budget for the year ended June 30, 2012, for half of a bus. There's $30,000 in the current year's budget for the other half of the bus. So this $30,000 was carryover for that. The $2,430.50 from the fire was just an invoice that got buried somewhere for J.P. McGuire Company that was for water drainage cleanup at station number 2. And the ECC is similar. They have a maintenance contract with NextGen, which is the software company that provides records management and computer-supported dispatch. And for some reason, they missed it. The police missed it. So that's being carried over, and a PO will be issued.
Okay, so the total we got is 59,930.50.
Okay. The item for the library is a little bit different. This is the only account that I'm aware of anyway that's handled this way, but every year the library gets a materials budget. That budget automatically gets carried over into next year if it's not fully spent.
Okay, so that's an automatic carryover.
That's an automatic.
Okay. Questions on Schedule C from the board?
I have a couple questions.
Walsh,
On the
please.
fire and the ECC, I understand what you're saying. So bottom line is that there's an invoice and they just forgot to write up a purchase order?
The purchase order has not been issued, therefore it has not been paid.
And they just forgot to do it? It was, this invoice has been sitting around?
Got missed.
Clerical error, in other
Clerical
words.
error. Thank you, Mr. Bolito.
Okay, and the conservation work, why didn't that work get done? Did they
I
explain that to you?
I have no idea when the property was gifted, I have no, or when it was processed, or when it will be processed.
Mr. Tetreault?
actually.
I believe this is the Cross Highway property
The one that just handled it last spring?
that we discussed
Yeah.
And where did
in
the
your- in your
$10,000?
in your prior life.
Yeah, I know.
The,
Yeah, and I get that. I guess the question I have is, we handled that kind of like somewhere between February and May.
We agreed to it. I don't know if it may have taken a while for all the transfer documentation to get done and back from the state for doing that, so they weren't able to get this money, as I understand it.
And I guess my question is, if we were talking about it on the Board of Selectmen about whether to do this, how did that actually get into a budget, that $10,000? Because it was from the
it was-
previous year's July that we would have approved it in the previous year, right?
Correct. It's
Okay.
part of the money that's in the conservation budget to take care and maintain certain open space items. So when we asked, is there going to be any new funding for this, Tom said, Mr. Stanky said, I can cover it within the budget.
Okay.
This
so-
is the portion that he cut out to cover it within, and because he didn't get it done by June 30th, it's got to get moved over into this fiscal year.
Okay, so he had money in his budget for it. He himself in his head kind of said, I'm going to assign $10,000 to this, and there's just the work hasn't been done.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any other questions on C or supplemental C? Nope. Okay, moving on. Schedule F.
D is,
E and F, I'm sorry.
D is the same. Town reappropriations that are more than a year old,
okay.
of which there are 0.
Okay. That's
And-
self-evident.
Ready to go to E?
Go right ahead, please.
And E is the same as A, but it's the Board of Ed versus the town.
Any questions on that? That's a substantial amount.
I guess I have questions. Is this like one PO, or is this like 1,000 POs?
I mean, I don't know what your background and history is, Mr. Wallace, but if you're ever working in an accounting shop or working in a corporation, you get lots of bills in July and August for services rendered in May and June, and they don't all get paid by June 30th. And so this would be a normal course of business.
Mr. Walsh, I'm assuming you'd want a munis
We're talking
breakdown
about
of this
no,
as
you're
well,
talking about-
correct?
You're talking about 2.2 million, excuse me, about 2 million. So you're talking about 1% of the budget.
Right, understood. Again, like we did with the previous schedule, if we could get a munis breakdown on that in time for the quarterly meeting, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
I guess, are these mostly bills from July? I mean, because we keep the books open till the end of, almost the end of August, right? I mean, you closed the books at the end of August? So we kept them open to cover a lot of invoices that were still coming through the pike for, when you say May and June, is this stuff like, there's all these invoices sitting around from May that have not been inputted? Through
I'm
the,
saying they're frequently not received. You'd have to go to each one specifically.
Okay.
Again, this is 1% of the activities. This is 3.5 days' worth of business.
Understood. Anything else, Mr. Walsh?
No, I'll see the munis report on it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're on to F,
That's it. F.
F0. That's it.
F is 0.
All right, just circling back, any questions, anything that someone forgot to ask, would like to ask? No? All right, so the item is before us, to hear, consider, and act upon a request from the fiscal officer to approve Schedules A, B, C, Supplemental C, D, E, and F, carrying over funds for encumbrances and reappropriations as of June 30th, 2012, as supported by purchase orders or letters of request by department heads or the fiscal officer. Do I have a motion? Mr. Brockfeld, seconded by Mr. DeWitt. All those in favor? That carries unanimously. 800. All right, item number 9. To discuss details and next steps required for the capital planning workshop update scheduled for October 29th, 2012. Mr. Tatro?
Just quickly, I think Mr. Flynn did a good job of pretty much updating the board in his opening remarks in terms of where we are. The one piece that I'd add is that Mr. Mayor has done a significant amount of rework on the waterfall chart and the supporting documents. Mr. Walsh, I think you and I have had some conversations at the Board of Selectmen level about that document and whether it was easy enough to see the projects that were included in the outgoing years and that type of thing. So the waterfall chart has now been expanded to several pages to hopefully make it easier for everybody to see and to make it much more usable. We're in the process of going back, kind of fitting both the town side facilities plan and the Board of Ed capital plan into that, so that for the 29th, we should have a good set of documents to review.
Okay. Are we doing it at Penfield again? I don't know if Mr. Flynn mentioned
I
where we're having it.
think he mentioned it was here.
Okay, it was here. Acoustically, that'll be better.
7:30, most likely?
7:30, as far as I know, right? Okay. And just, if you could expedite all the various interested parties, and Ms. Abbasi as well, just to make sure that everybody who's supposed to be there is there, and obviously Board of Ed, we usually invite some RTM members as well. So just to get the word out, that would be much appreciated.
Very much.
All right. Oh, yes, Mr. Brown, please.
Caitlin,
Just-
perhaps if we can just coordinate
not
that to
tonight.
make sure the right folks are invited.
Mr. Brown,
Tetro,
please.
yeah. The waterfall charts, when do you think we would receive them? Before the meeting, a couple days before?
We're anticipating a couple days before, but I'll defer to Mr. Mayor.
Most certainly.
Okay, thank you. All right. Any other comments about that? All right. Item 10, to hear, consider, and act upon any communications. Ms. Abbasi, do we have any?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Use the mic. Thank you. All right, finally, to hear, consider, and act upon any business which shall properly come before this meeting. I'm not aware of any. Anyone else? All right, at this time, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Stone, seconded by Mrs. Albin. All in favor? Aye. We are done. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I think I got us out in under 10 minutes, right?
13.